Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a review. It's sort of more of an early impression, but I'm calling it a review. There's just too much stuff for me to cover. And so this is one that I absolutely would like to share with you. It's actually the very first review on the channel from this brand. It's a very fascinating brand called Nebiru. Nebiru. Nebiru Parfvms is the full name, Nebiru Parfvms. Interestingly enough, the U in Parfvms is a V, so, you know, very Perfumum Roma-like naming there. But today we're going to talk about Rosa Sequoyah. Now, from my understanding, well, first of all, you can see the detailing in the name kind of carved or engraved into the wood there. Very, very beautiful packaging for these little, I don't know what these are, 10 mils or whatever they are. I'm going to do some fresh sprays because I absolutely love this juice. I'm going to smell really good going to the gym today. And man, I'll tell you what, very, very interesting work by Frederic, who is the owner and perfumer of this brand from my understanding. And it's funny because for me, as somebody who is constantly learning and constantly going deeper and deeper into the fragrance rabbit hole, if you will, these type of brands, these artisanal houses, if you want to call it that, it's crazy how many of these I'm just unaware of, or I'm aware of them, I've just never had a chance to smell any of their work. This was sent to me in a recent unboxing that I did, and I'll tell you what, this is the type of work that makes me sort of optimistic about the future of the fragrance game. Not because of what the big houses are doing, but because of these type of brands like Nibiru. And so this is the very first time that I've had a chance to talk about this brand on the channel. I'll tell you what, when I wore this to bed last night for the first time, and I'm wearing it today as my scent of the day, I felt like Borat. You know, the first time I put it on, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, this just absolutely stopped me in my tracks. I was like, what in the world is this? It is so good right off the bat. You know, you're hit with just the quality of the ingredients. I was not expecting that. I'll tell you what, I was expecting a lot of different things, because it's interesting because many of these artisanal houses, if you will, that I talk about on the channel come from the Middle East or have some sort of Middle Eastern background. You talk about, you know, Russian Adam. You talk about Ensar. I know, obviously, Russian Adam is Russian, but he talks about his time he spent with Arabs and, you know, the way that they've influenced his love of fragrances and stuff like that. And, you know, Prakar Gupta of Sherwood is from India, and, you know, that side of the world, let's say. So now we talk about a house coming from Germany, and I just really wasn't expecting something along the lines of what you might get from a Riesler Doré or something like that, you know. There's good and there's bad with this brand right off the bat, though, I'll tell you that. The bad, and hopefully he can get this fixed, is that he operates very much like Prakar Gupta operates from Sherwood Parfvms, and that you have to hit him up on Instagram, from my understanding. If I'm wrong, please correct me. This is the first time I'm reviewing this house. But from my understanding, you have to hit up Frederic on Instagram. And that's how you can basically reserve a bottle. He does very, very small batch sizes, 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 bottles, 150 bottles, stuff like that. Oh man, it is phenomenal. This is amazing work. Shocked. I wish he had a website so I could read you guys a blurb or something like that. I can't do that, okay? I do have some pricings for you guys, though. 10 mils is about $125. I made the conversion from euros to dollars, okay? So basically $125 for 10 mils. 30 mils is about $350. Average artisanal pricing, if you want to call it that. Again, this is as of the currency conversion on March 4th of 2025. That can very quickly change. But since he's German, it's priced in euros. And the full name of the guy who owns this house, his name is Frederic Gieselbach. Hell of a name, by the way. Hell of a name. And it's funny because after wearing this as my scent of the day, the very first thing that I did is I went and put every single fragrance from this house on my wish list. And I've come across a couple of these houses in 2025 that have just absolutely floored me. And they're not necessarily new houses, although I think Nibiru is a newer house. The other one that, and I've been testing this as well, this is a fantastic fragrance called Fujariste by Angelos Creations Olfactifs. This is another one of these houses that I am floored with, and I have everything on my wish list from the house. If money was no issue, I would just own all of them. They're just fantastic so far from what I've had a chance to smell. And it's interesting because, you know, if you asked me early on, Ramsey, would you love a fragrance that is, let's say, floral heavy? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on how the florals are done. And usually I would say no. Florals can be hit or miss for me, especially if they're white florals. You know, I'm not as harsh on some of the white floral fragrance as some folks in the community, but I will say that they can be hit or miss. But then I got to thinking, you know, a fragrance like Malik Al Taif, which I've worn already multiple times since I acquired this from Ajay. And just as a side note, for those of you following along, we did pass the 12,000 subscriber mark, so there will be a live stream at some point. It's just a matter of finding time to do it. And I've been building Ajay a little collection of Amouage samples for his generosity for sending Malik Al Taif and Oud Luwak my way. So he's going to get to try all of the Amouages that I have in the main collection. And so I'm going to send this to him hopefully by the end of the week, once I finish doing decanting, which is like you get carpal tunnel in your finger from like spray. But I got to thinking, you know, Malik Al Taif is one of those floral heavy fragrances that is one of my all-time favorites. And I thought, what are they doing? You know, what are the steps that some of the perfumers taking when there's a floral fragrance like this that just grabs me, you know? And then there's others where I'm like, you know, hit or miss. And when you really get into it, the very first thing you notice about Rosa Sequoyah is the extremely high quality rose oils. I'm going to read you the note listing here in just a little bit, but there's probably 5 or 6 different types of roses in here that are extremely high quality. They play off of each other brilliantly. You can smell I mean, it's like being in a rose field. Just imagine being in a field and seeing roses as far as the eye can see. Oh, and it's just absolutely fantastic. However, the rose in here doesn't remind me as much as the rose in Malik Al Taif. I'm not saying it has that Taif rose type smell. It reminds me more of the rose in a rose fragrance that I did a comparison video on, which was originally called Creed's Windsor from 2009. They changed the name from Windsor to Royal Mayfair in 2015 or whatever it was. Then they discontinued it. Then Creed now brought it back now that they're under the parent ownership of Caring Beauty. And so if you can imagine that fresh feeling of Creed's Royal Mayfair, you know, there is a freshness to this fragrance, especially when you first spray. But I think what brings it into the pure love category, what made me just stop in my eyes, you know, do one of these, and me having no words, is the animalic blend that has along with it. You guys know I absolutely love animalic ingredients in a fragrance, and in this case, he's basically mixed a couple animalic notes. One is real musk, which we'll talk about where those real musk ingredients come from. Another is African hyrax and Ethiopian civet. Those are the trio of real animalic notes in here that I think just turns this from a potentially average floral heavy fragrance into something amazing. You know, the way that the animalics are done. And that's, I think, something very similar with Malik Al Taif, because there's real Indian oud in here. There's real musk in here. There's real musk in Rosa Sequoyah as well. There's no oud, but there's some interesting bits and pieces we'll talk about as well. But it just sort of captures me. This animalic blend, if you will, takes the floral rose heavy heart and elevates it to a place that I wouldn't imagine. You know, I wouldn't imagine this type of fragrance being such a love for me. And yet, just because of the way that the animalics are done, I'm absolutely in love with this fragrance. So if you put this under my nose and you said, Ramsey, you're blindfolded, smell this, where does this come from? I would easily say, you know, if you told me this is in Arige Ladore, or the only thing about being in Arige is that his fragrances are a little bit heavier on the animalic side of things. This is a little bit more toned down. The animalics are not as front and center and aggressive as an Arige. You could easily say maybe it's like an Ensar or something like that, you know, because Ensar isn't as harsh on the animalics as Arige is. But if you told me it was one of these high-end artisanal houses that sells 50 mils for $2,000, I would believe you. I mean, I would absolutely believe you. The blend and the mixing of the ingredients is out of this world. and it's just of such high quality. I wouldn't even give it a second thought. You know, if you told me that's what it is, I would not even give it a second thought. And you know, I also wonder if he has some connection to Ethiopia, because Nibiru is an Amharic word, which is basically the official language of Ethiopia. So just some interesting connections here with the Ethiopian civet. I don't know, my brain was wandering. Someone left me a comment on the unboxing that got me thinking about that. But let me give you this glorious note breakdown. This note breakdown is absolutely phenomenal. So in the top, you have ambrette seed, carrot seed, cardamom, neroli, bergamot, tangerine, orange blossom, and cherry. And we'll talk a little bit about that cherry note as well in just a little bit. The heart is Japanese Damascena rose, Turkish Damascena rose from Isparta, which is one of the like hearts of proper Turkish rose growing. Bulgarian white alba rose, which I love a white alba rose concoction. Aged Azerbaijani Damascena rose, Moroccan rose de mai, iris butter, iris absolute, and a vintage floral oil concoction of neroli, jasmine, and rose oils from the 1950s. Now, you're probably seeing some very fascinating shades of artisanal fragrances from the past. You know, that working with some of these vintage and rare materials sets some of these houses apart, in my opinion. Now, the base, which I think he calls the home, is sandalwood from I believe it's Kerala, Kerala, if I'm not mistaken, Kerala, India. Vintage 1953 sandalwood from Kerala, India, along with Mysore sandalwood. So my guess is if it's vintage sandalwood from Kerala, it very well may be Mysore, but maybe they don't know that, so he didn't say it. But Mysore sandalwood, Indonesian sandalwood, vintage SQ, Siberian, and Mongolian musk. Now let's talk about that for a second, because SQ is usually abbreviated to mean Sultan Qaboos, because when the Sultan of Oman passed away, he left sort of this huge stash of it. Imagine if I was like a sultan, you know, and I was a fragrance lover, and I had the country's disposable income behind me to buy all this crazy stuff. And that's what the sultan did. He had one of the most amazing collection of real ouds and real musks and all this stuff, right? And once he passed away, they started to kind of sell that out to people who had the money to pay. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Frederic got his hands on some of Sultan Qaboos's Siberian and Mongolian musk. I think Mongolian musk is basically extinct at this point anyways. So to get it, you have to get it from a vintage collection like Sultan Qaboos's, along with New Zealand ambergris, African hyraceum, Ethiopian civet, Texas and wild atlas cedar, balsams, and resins in the base. Hell of a note breakdown. You know, just a note breakdown after my heart, if you will. So describing this is going to be a bitch. I'll tell you that right now, because I wore it for 2 days, basically to bed last night, and then for the first time today is the very first full wear. Okay, it's 12:36 Central Time. I've been wearing it for 4 or 5 hours. So sort of an early impression video, if you will. And like I said, describing this is going to be tough, but I'm going to do my best. So basically when it opens up with this flash bang of brightness, you know, like it's almost like this big bang level of bright. All right. You get the florals right away, but the bergamot, the tangerine, they do their jobs brilliantly in the start. And if you asked me early on, I would have said that this is a very bright take on rose, you know, a very fresh, sort of auspicious opening. This opening tells you you're going to smell something amazing when you first smell this opening. And the fresh notes start to do their job beautifully. And it's March the 4th today in Texas. The sun is shining. It's a beautiful spring day, although we were under a tornado watch recently. It wouldn't be spring in Texas without tornadoes and crazy weather. But this opening, this fresh, citrusy, green opening feels like it's just heralding, you know, the coming of an army of rose notes to kind of follow behind. It just absolutely blew me away. I love everything about the opening of this fragrance. Everything initially is extremely effervescent and fresh and bright and uplifting, and it has all of these type of qualities to it. There are some spices that you'll get. There's a little bit of cardamom. There's some carrot seed, which blends beautifully with the coming of the real expensive Orris Absolute and Orris butter and all that stuff. But it's just a beautiful opening. Early on, Along with all of these fresh notes, you're going to notice a couple things very early on. Number one, the realism of the rose and the sandalwood. The rose and the sandalwood are, even early on in the fragrance, you can smell the quality and you can smell them peeking through on your skin. And if you've smelled real Mysore sandalwood, you'll smell the quality of the sandalwood in this. It's even in the very early times of the fragrance being on your skin, the beauty of the vintage sandalwood oil is there to shine. Okay, even very early on, the beauty of the real rose oils shine. The real sandalwood, real rose, real musk start kind of creeping through up through the fragrance pyramid very early on. And no matter who your favorite big name perfumer is for some of these big houses, whether it's Francis Kurkdjian or Delphine Jelk, Thierry Vassar, all these people who I really rate and look up to, and I think they're amazing. You know, when I think about what they're doing, they're blending these compounds from IFF, from Givaudan, from Firmenich, from Maine, all these different, oil houses, and they're trying to recreate. That's the main thing. When you smell some of these designer fragrances, it is to me a recreation of rose, a recreation of sandalwood, a recreation of musk. So when you smell something like this, if you have the experience of going from the designer to the niche to the artisanal houses and kind of going all across the spectrum, smelling the new stuff, smelling vintage, stuff like this, where it really feels like this is not just an approximation. This is not a perfumer, and this is their job to go out and put something amazing together that smells like you're getting this sandalwood accord. That's what they call it. They call it an accord, or they're creating an oud accord, or whatever it is, because they're creating the approximation of a smell. Well, when you smell something like this, you're smelling the real deal. If you've ever heard the term the real McCoy, that's what this fragrance reminds me of. It smells like you're smelling the real McCoy. You're smelling what those designer fragrances are really trying to approximate here. Now, let's go back to the cherry note in the top, because many of these sort of note listings, cherry for the longest time was, even now, I know Tom Ford has released like 3 different cherry fragrances. Bodicea the Victorious has their cherry fragrance that competes with it and all this stuff. It was like it caught on like wildfire all of a sudden. Everyone wanted to have their cherry fragrance. Well, here the cherry note is very strange because it almost gives the fragrance this hint of oud, And if you're a lover of musks, eventually you'll turn into a lover of oud. If you're a lover of oud, eventually you'll turn into a lover of musk. It's just kind of this kind of big runaround. So even though this has a big real musk base, there's no oud in here, at least none that's listed. Although it does smell like there's some oud, because I think there's some Palo Santo wood, which gives a little bit of this smoky quality in the base. Just imagine a little bit of this hint of incense, as if you're smelling just a small piece of wood burning in the corner, but a very small amount, not like a pile, just a small tiny piece. And it's just giving off a little whirl, a little swirl of smoke into the air. And it gives it a little bit of that sort of hint of oud, that rich. When I reviewed the history of Indian oud on the channel by Ariz Ladore, I mentioned that cherry wood note mixing beautifully with the oud, and how smooth it is. You can go check out my history of oud reviews if you're interested in those kind of fragrances, or, well, really that's just real oud with a little bit of perfumer's alcohol. But here, the cherry note does something very fascinating, because it almost brings in this sort of embellished oud note. There's no oud in here, but it's almost like it's an embellished note, if you will. And it can give this deep, rich feeling to the wood that otherwise wouldn't be there, and it works beautifully as a bridge note between the big bang effervescent sort of opening top, and as the fragrance dries, it just becomes more and more and more musky as it kind of goes along. And if you can just imagine all of these different natural smelling roses starting to feel like they're wrapped in this like honey, wood, milky, musky, woody kind of aura around the roses. That's how it ends up smelling as time goes on, right? The white rose mixing with the different roses from Azerbaijan and Japan and Turkey, Isparta, all of these different places. And the quality is just phenomenal. It'll knock you off your feet. It's absolutely phenomenal. So, yet what I found so fascinating about this is that the clarity of the rose, sometimes when you add all these ingredients, the real musk, the civet, the hyrax, the different balsams. I mentioned multiple types of cedar wood, you know, the sandalwood, the orris, the iris, adding this poshness to it. Iris is a beautiful note if you want a fragrance to smell extremely expensive and posh, and slightly powdery as well. You know, that papery, powdery aspect mixing with the florals here. And what's crazy is the clarity. You know, sometimes you imagine musk and all these notes almost building this wall, like you can't see to the center of the fragrance. You can't really see the roses anymore because they're obscure, they're obstructed, you know? But here, the clarity, the freshness of the rose, it really stays true to itself. The details, the beauty of the rose, the vintage sort of florals, this bouquet of flowers that you're smelling. And you get everything, you know, you get the green stems, the leaves, the thorns, the actual sort of silky petals themselves. Imagine just the silky petals, picking them off one by one. Now, as the hours tick by and you get into the home stretch, and like I said, I think he calls the base notes, the home notes, and it basically sort of, the florals start hiding a little bit more behind, sort of that thicker wall of the creamy, spongy, soft sandalwood that you're smelling. Just feels like you could just lay back and fall on it. You know, it just really has that feeling to it. Now, one thing to mention, I mentioned a lot of animalic notes. Funnily enough, I get more of the animalic notes in the top than I do the base. And I think a part of the reason for that is probably the vintage musks that are being used, the Mongolian deer musk and stuff like that. It has a little different aura, a little different feel to it than Siberian deer musk. Mongolian deer musk can smell much more floral, and it doesn't have as much of the sort of like bloody, urinous notes, right? It's a good way to put it. It doesn't have like the bloody, urinous, furry notes of the Siberian deer musk. It smells much smoother. And that's what happens as the fragrance begins to dry down, is that the musk, even though it has little animalic touches in it here or there, it just adds this smooth experience, you know? Like everything has been softened and blended together in this beautiful vintage style. I think if you split the fragrance in two and said, okay, here's the top, you know, the first 2 or 3 hours are here. Once you get into the dry down, 3, 4, 5 hours in is down here. I think I prefer the top because the top, everything is, you're really just able to experience everything in such beautiful clarity. The sun is shining on the roses. Everything is right there for you to see. Whereas the base begins to get a little bit more sort of, you know, it's almost like everything is so smoothly blended together that some of those details, while they're still there, you can still see them. They're not as clear as the first 2 or 3 hours. My only complaint with this entire setup, this entire fragrance, and it is sort of this floral, woody fragrance. If you, I don't know how you would categorize this, some sort of floral, woody musk, if you will. But my only complaint is I really wish the animalics on this were turned up, like in a Riesling Doré. You know, I wish there was a big Indian oud note in here or something like that. That's my only complaint, and it's just a personal preference thing for me. That's the other thing. There are animalic notes in here, but I experience them more, funnily enough, I experience them more in the top than I do the base, because the base brings in more of the musk, and the musk just smoothly blends everything together. You know, like taking the grains out of the musk pod and just smearing them right across the front of the screen. And so the roses and everything else is still behind it, but that musk is just smeared on top. So that's a very, very small complaint in a beautiful fragrance. Now, folks really know my taste, because many people have commented and said, you're going to love this brand, Ramsey. You know, you have to try it, on and on and on and on. So like I said, I am shocked by just how many of these brands are out there nowadays, how many of them exist. And this is what's exciting about the future of perfume for me. It's not the stuff that's going on at Dior, Guerlain. No offense to them. Guerlain's probably one of my favorite French houses of all time, vintage French houses. It's just where they've gone is somewhere that doesn't appeal to someone like me, especially since we're talking very similar pricing. Now, maybe price per mil on the Guerlain, you're going to get a little bit more. But if I was going to spend $350, it would much rather be on something like this than on the latest Guerlain, you know? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. If you guys have experience with this house, Nibiru, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you are into the artisanal scene and you were like me a week ago, you never heard of this or tried their work before, definitely put them on the to sniff list. This is very, very impressive work. Cannot wait to try more from Frederic's work. He sent me a couple others. He sent me Mandalay, and he also sent me Florist Rex. So you'll be hearing more about this house for sure, and also some of these other houses I've been smitten with, like Angelos Creations Olfactif. So anyways, love to hear your thoughts in the comments. As always, it's a pleasure. Thank you to everyone who helped us get to 12,000 subscribers. God willing, we've got a chance to do a live stream one of these days very, very soon. As always, love you guys. Cheers. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.